So again, I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for being here. I think this is such a conference comes at such a very important time, critical for all of us, critical for our friends in Israel, as well as our members of our congregation. The topic I decided to entitle my talk is Should Rabbis Talk About Politics from the Bema? And I'm sure if I were to do a survey here of all of you, there would be different answers. Some would say yes, some would say no, some would probably say yes and no. I think if we were to ask our congregants what they would say about it, they would probably say it is okay to speak about politics from the pulpit, provided you agree with their position. Then it's okay. But I raised this topic one Yom Kippur, and I debated in the beginning about whether or not it's permissible. And then I said, I'm going to give a non-political sermon tonight. I'm going to talk about Israel and why we should be supportive of Israel. And that's one of the ways that I think we should be approaching this issue, especially this high holidays. And that is, just as there is no question that we are advocates for Judaism, that we as rabbis, regardless of our personal affiliation, are advocates for living a Jewish life, so too should we be advocates for the Jewish people. So too should we be advocates for the Jewish people, which includes the nation state of the Jewish people, the state of Israel. We are living through one of the most challenging times as Jews in recent history. And that makes our role as rabbis this year more important than ever. I don't know about you, but this past year has felt like a roller coaster. The Hamas launching of a surprise attack on October 7th certainly devastated each and every one of us. And then, some months later, some of the hostages were released. We're back up. Then some of the hostages are rescued. Then some are killed just before being released, as in the yahrzeit that was observed just last week of the 6 who were killed, including Hirsch Goldberg Poland. Then Yahya Sinwar is eliminated. Up. We find out then that the Bema children have been brutally tortured and killed. The successful pager operation is pulled off against Hezbollah. Assad is deposed as ruler of Syria. Leaders of terrorist factions in Hezbollah and Iran are knocked off. Iran's nuclear facilities are set back. And then France, Britain, Canada, and Australia announced the recognition of, they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. And so it's truly been this roller coaster of emotions this past year or two. And despite Israel's successes on the battlefield, who after October 7th would have thought that Israel would be in the military position it is today, with Hamas basically devastated, with Hezbollah weakened and to the point now where they are entering into an agreement to disarm and become in Lebanon, and with Syria, with Assad gone, and so on and so forth. So despite all of the successes on the 7 fronts that Israel was surrounded by, the Hamas propaganda machine and its supporters are working overtime. And as we all know, it certainly appears that they're winning the PR war. A terrorist organization, which is known to lie and who've been caught lying. Just remember the hospital incident early on when it was claimed that Israel had bombed the hospital. A terrorist organization who practices deception. As recently as last week, they painted a truck with World Food Kitchen markings on it. They even had their terrorist went so far as to put on the vest of the World Kitchen in order to either deceive and to be a part of their campaign. Maybe they were hoping Israel would attack them, so then they would be able to get even that much more sympathy. A terrorist organization who, as we all know, hide behind civilians, hide behind children, who inflates their death figures, who terrorizes its own population. There's something in, I forget, it was the Jerusalem Post or Times of Israel today, which shows one of the video of what Hamas does to people in its territories, who controls the information coming out of Gaza, and who's clearly demonstrated that they really don't care about the death toll on either side. Those are the guys that are being believed. What kind of world do we live in? Well, the democratic country, which has a free and critical, as we all know, press, is not believed. I have a great suggestion for Hamas. I really do. And that is, after the war, I think what they should do is open a PR agency. They would be capable of convincing the world that smoking is good for you. We're fighting a war of images. The world accepts their narrative and questions ours. You heard what Yitz had to say. All of us are familiar with that New York Times front page picture seen by, I heard different estimates, 55 million to 85 million people. And then, of course, the correction that they buried a few days later, seen by about 35 to 55,000 people. They didn't even do it in the paper. Yeah, crazy. So it just shows what we're up against. Gil Troy pointed out, I was with him just last week in Jerusalem. He said, it's interesting. Think about this. I hadn't thought about it. That all of the mistakes that the New York Times makes, they're all against Israel. So what does that tell us about their orientation? What does that tell us about what we're up against? And of course, we contrast that with the plight of Eviatar David. And the heart-wrenching picture of him, which I could not put out of my mind for the past couple of weeks. But let's be honest. The problem is that too many of our people, and to be honest, too many rabbis included, allow our opinions to be formed by what we read in the New York Times, by what we hear in the press. And this is why our role that Yitz spoke about, our role in helping to dispel the lies, to counter the misimpressions and the misrepresentations is so very important, crucial, and vital. It's important because those lies, those libels, the propaganda against the Jewish people are not being challenged. And who other than us as rabbis can and should do that? Otherwise, that's what's accepted as the only acceptable narrative that's out there. And it becomes internalized. What does that mean? When Jews begin to believe the terrible things that are being said about us, and when we begin to internalize those negative images, just think what that does to a sense of Jewish identity, whether it's among young people or others. Think about what it does, the harm it does to the weakening of Jewish pride. And ultimately, it doesn't just distance us from Israel, but from Judaism and the Jewish people itself, from a sense of belonging. And none of us in this room want that to happen, because if it does, we're all going to be out of a job. So let me put it this way. We must not allow Israel's enemies and detractors to determine and define our relationship with Israel. Let me repeat that. We must not let Israel's enemies or its detractors determine and define our relationship with Israel. We have to put out a different story. One of the dilemmas Israel faces, and this is where we can play such an important role. We can help people understand that Israel has to speak two languages. It has to be bilingual. In the Mideast, to survive, it has to appear to be, and it actually has to be strong. As one pro-Israel Arabic commentator, Yosef Haddad, put it, to survive in the Middle East, you have to know how to speak Arabic. What he meant was to be tough. What he meant was not to be perceived as being soft. And the problem is that while speaking that way, it's necessary to be loved in the West, which has such a different parlance, one which we know, and which doesn't necessarily understand Arabic. So I come back to what Golda Meir had said. You know, she had so many unbelievable pithy comments. It's amazing. But this one in particular I want to share, and that is, she said, I would prefer to live and have bad press. I would prefer to be alive and have bad press than to be dead and have a beautiful eulogy. She captured it all. So what is Israel up against? Well, in addition to the seven-front war it wages with enemies who surround it and who expend exorbitant amount of time, energy, resources, and money trying to figure out how to destroy Israel, it's also fighting an eighth front, and that is the Islamists, the radical Islamists, the fundamentalists, who are coupled with the far left and now the far right. Thank you, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who seek to demonize, delegitimize, and ostracize Israel. And not just Israel, but they are actually working overtime to ostracize its supporters and any and all Jews. Think about all of the attacks on Jewish restaurants, on Jews that we read about almost daily that are taking place across the world. Somehow, this group of Islamists and the far left and the far right has managed to turn Palestine from a concept of a country into a cause. It's a cause which has rhymes and catchy, easy chants and slogans. As Jonathan Tobin recently wrote after the onslaught of the countries in the West, France and Canada and Britain suddenly saying they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. Joining, by the way, apparently there are something like over 140 countries who have already recognized a Palestinian state, whatever that means. So Jonathan Tobin recently wrote, and he said, it seems that everybody wants a Palestinian state except the Palestinians. You all know as well as I do how many times they've been offered a state, how many times they've been offered the opportunity to create a state for their people. But the reality is that they're really much more intent on destroying Israel than having their own homeland. You know, just two thoughts come to mind. One was when there was some talk a few years ago about serious talk about the possibility of a Palestinian state. And then Mahmoud Abbas wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times in which he said, the reason we want to have a Palestinian state is so that then we will be able to bring claims against Israel in the International Court of Justice, because at the time they weren't accepted in there. Michael Oren responded at the time, Israel's ambassador to the United States, and he said, they're missing the whole point. If there is to be a Palestinian state, it means it's the end of the conflict. We're done. We're not going to keep adjudicating this on and on. But it just shows what the real purpose is. I just was with Ron Dermer last week in Israel and had a wonderful conversation with him. And one of the things that he said was, you know, we all are familiar with Abba Eban's famous statement, which is, Palestinians have never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. He said, but what if that's actually not true? What if, in fact, the real goal of the Palestinians is not to have a state, but rather to delegitimize Israel, rather to continue the ongoing conflict with Israel? In that case, then in fact, they haven't missed those opportunities. They've capitalized on them. And so the jihadists who attacked on October 7th, they weren't shouting, we want a two-state solution. They were shouting, Itbah Yahud, slaughter the Jews. So Hamas somehow gets a pass. It gets a pass, and they bear no responsibility for the suffering of their own people. It's as if the Gazans have no agency. Now, that's a complicated question because, as we know, anyone who would express an opinion that would disagree with Hamas is going to be tortured and killed right away. And yet, on the other hand, it seems as if there's this great acceptance. Maybe it's because of the brainwashing. But so many of the hostages who have been released talk about the fact that they were held in homes of normal Gazans, everyday people. And they saw in their copies of Mein Kampf, they saw in their copies of all kinds of hateful literature about Jews and about Israel. And so they said, just when they thought maybe there was some humanity or decency somewhere, there wasn't. And I'm sure, as many of you may know, as has been pointed out, during the period of Nazi Germany conquest of so much of Europe, there were still people who rescued and saved Jews, who protected them. In Gaza, there's not a single incident that we know of a Gazan turning over an Israeli hostage, saving or helping them. And in fact, Israel offered a $5 million reward for any Gazan who would help to save an Israeli hostage. And there were no takers. $5 million would go a long way in Gaza. And so the Gazans have no agency. The people of Hamas take no responsibility. That doesn't mean, however, that we have to accept that. That doesn't mean that we have to acquiesce and shirk responsibility and excuse Hamas for the suffering of its people. It's incumbent upon us to remind people that, yes, there is suffering in Gaza, but to remember what is the source and the cause of that suffering. It is Hamas, and we should hold them accountable in the court of public opinion. We need to remind everyone that Israel is fighting an enemy who really doesn't care about its losses. Can you think of any other time in history when an army has been so clearly defeated, when all of its top people have been eliminated, and yet they refuse to give up? When its people and its population and its areas are so devastated, and yet they refuse to give up? There's only one way to understand that. Only one way to explain the reason that Hamas continues to fight, and that is because it doesn't care about its people. It doesn't care about the loss of life. And its goal, as it's pointed out, is nothing less than the destruction of Israel as written in its charter. Not only does it not give up, by the way, but it goes one step further. It refuses to stop the fighting, and it demands that it come on its own terms. There's a way to understand and explain that. It is the classic definition of chutzpah. Now, you all know the definition of chutzpah is when someone kills his parents and then pleads for mercy before the court because he's an orphan. Guess what? It applies to Hamas as well. They see to it that their children are killed, and then they come to the court of world opinion and plead for mercy. That's the classic definition of chutzpah. So I ask you to set aside any misgivings you may have about the current government. I thought Joel's question was interesting and Yitz's response was interesting. I might have a slightly different answer, and that is that publicly, I have never criticized Israel from the pulpit, personally. Some of you may not. We can certainly agree to disagree on different positions about that. I'm always concerned about nuance. I'm always concerned about how things will be misinterpreted and taken out of context. I will say this, having been in Israel just for the last month, and I'm sure all of us are aware of the different demonstrations and the family forum and what they've called for and so on. And I don't want to be too controversial here, but I will say this, and that is, it seems to me, and I asked a half a dozen people when I was in Israel, that when the government said that they are going to go for a partial deal to get some of the hostages out, then the protesters objected and said, you have to get them all out. And when the government has said, we're going to go for all or nothing, then they've said, no, you got to get some of them out. I think that tells you part of the real motivation about, again, so many of these demonstrations. Many of them are using the hostages for their own political purposes against the government. Take it for what you want, pro or con, but I think we have to keep that in mind. And I've seen it time and time again. Think about some of the articles that you've seen and the demands there. So the important thing we need to keep in mind are two simple questions, and that is, what is it that Israel wants? We all know what Israel wants. It really just wants peace. It wants to be able to continue to live, and we know it. We see it in their songs. We see it in the way they live their lives. We see the way they educate their children. We see it in their hopes and dreams and conversations we all have with cousins, with relatives, and with friends in Israel. And then ask yourself, what is it that Hamas seeks? It should be so very clear. It should be so clear, and yet somehow to so many it is not. So part of our responsibility is to remind people of this. That's what we have this opportunity on this high holidays to do. Now, by no means is Israel perfect. Obviously, no person is, no country is. But I remind you, as I say in the brochure that's on your tables there, we do not love Israel because she is perfect. Nor do we need Israel to be perfect for us to love her. So do those rabbis who may think they know better, and I know that many come at it from a position of love and concern. Many are committed Zionists, but who feel incumbent upon them to publicly criticize Israel or to participate in public declarations about what Israel is doing wrong. I think we need to think about a few things. What is the long-term impact of that kind of a statement? It won't necessarily change the policies of Israel, but it will affect the hearts and minds of those who hear those messages, of those who read those messages. I think those who think that Israel needs to hear their critique need to keep in mind, Israel, God bless her, does not lack for critics. There are plenty of people out there who are critical of Israel. I don't think we need to join in that fray. Second, I suggest we approach the issue of how we speak about Israel with a sense of humility. We cannot imagine, all of you have been in Israel for an extended period of time, and you think about just the daily newspaper articles that don't even make the online editions of the Times of Israel or of Jerusalem Post, whether it's the car rammings or whether it's stabbings, the initial reaction to the start at the Nova Festival. Just remember what they said, the people who were there. They said, oh, at first we heard it and we thought, what did they say? We thought it was a routine red alert. Just stop for a moment and think, what does that mean? That there is a routine bomb alert, that a bomb alert is considered routine. We are not awakened in the middle of the night having to pick up our children or perhaps infirm or elderly and run to the middle of run and to find and run to a safe room. My grandson just got back from being in Israel for a couple of months and is staying with us. He's 7 years old. Yesterday morning, he said to me, Saba, where is the safe room in your home? Where is the safe room in your home? That's what they have to live with and grow up with. So we all have a tendency, think about it, to project our values onto others, to assume they must be rational actors and that they think as we do. Western rational liberal people, it doesn't work like that. That's that aspect of needing to learn how to speak in Arabic. We have a tendency to project our values onto others and to assume they will have it. So as Israel seeks to defend itself from an enemy that clearly seeks its annihilation, to ensure that Hamas will not be allowed to survive, to, as they have said in their own words, commit another October 7th, somehow Israel's become the bad guy in the international press and the international world. It's as if Hamas is Teflon, or even worse. Worse, what can be worse than Teflon where nothing sticks? And that is they're rubber. What I mean by that is the old saying, whatever is said about Hamas bounces off of them and sticks to us. Remember that saying, I am rubber and you're glue. Whatever you say about me bounces off of me and sticks to you, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening. It seems in a sick, perverse way, the worst charges against Hamas bounce off of them and stick to Israel, whether it is of committing genocide, which is their intention, whether it is committing starvation, which is part of their policy, whether it's apartheid, which Israel is accused of, you name it. The accusations against Israel mount. The accusations against Israel mount, and I won't go to refutation of all of these charges. All I can say is, having just returned from Israel, the apartheid is so clearly false. I was up in the northern area, and there's no difference there. There were Arabs who were shopping in the same shopping centers as Jews. There were Arabs who were working side by side in these different places. The genocide charge is false. And as for starvation, we cannot deny that food shortages and distribution are a problem. However, this, like the other two slurs against Israel, keep in mind, starvation is not the official policy of the government of Israel. In fact, I saw some statistics the other day about some of this, and that is that there were, since October 7th, there have been 2 million tons of food, water, medical, and shelter that have been admitted to Gaza. There have been over 100,000 trucks that have come into Gaza. There are thousands of trucks which have carried in 45,000 tons of medical equipment. Over 2,000 packages of aid have been dropped by 14 countries just in the last couple of weeks alone. So, yes, there is a problem. But again, as I'm sure many of you know, and I don't need to go into much detail about it, the problem is that Hamas has used this in order to manipulate its people and to make money. In the last 6 months alone, Hamas made $500 million on the food that they stole and then sold to their people. It reminds me a little bit of a Woody Allen joke. He once said, pulled out a watch. He said, my grandfather on his deathbed sold me this watch. That's what Hamas is doing. They're selling the food that they should be giving. Another reason why we must rise to the challenge this year is how the world perceives Israel has an impact on Jews around the world. Anti-Semitism, we're going to be hearing next from Jonathan Greenblatt. Anti-Semitism is no longer an outlier. It's no longer just on the fringes. It's become acceptable. It's almost become mainstream. The demonization of Israel is so pervasive, and we see it linked together in the attacks on Jews around the world. It's being spread on social media, and I'm going to ask Jonathan about that. Gil Hoffman of Honest Reporting has noted that TikTok content is 50 times more anti-Israel than pro-Israel content. 50 times more. 55 times more. And so what happens is we, Jews, become guilty by association. The attacks around the world, the effect all of this is having on marginalizing of Jews. I liken it to the disputations of the Middle Ages. The disputations of the Middle Ages, where the goal was to humiliate Jews and to make us uncomfortable with our tradition, to question our fealty to our own people. That's part of what this is all about. So, my friends, on this high holidays, we have an important role. I urge you, we must fortify our people so they do not doubt themselves or Israel. We need to restore their faith in our people. How many times have you heard Israel has terrible PR, Hasbara, whatever, fill in the blank. Exactly. So guess what? They can't do it. We need to do it. We need to do it for them because they either can't, won't, or are incapable of doing it or understanding how important it is. They're busy fighting on the battlefield. Let us fight the battle of public opinion. We all know Israel and Israelis. Tell your personal experiences. Tell your stories. Just speaking with somebody the other day, and he said, he said, well, my 4-year-old is in kindergarten, is in Gan, and he's learning songs about Shabbat. Their 4-year-olds in Gaza are learning songs about killing Jews. Tell the story. I also just met a young man, Alon Kamiel. We all know about resilience and things like that. I'm only going to share one brief story about that. And this was an individual who had been in Gaza, who fought there and who lost an arm and he lost a leg. He was here at NIH in Washington for rehabilitation, and he was unconscious for several months after what had happened to him and so on. It's just a terrible story. A handsome young man who now his life is perhaps destroyed, but he didn't allow it to be destroyed. He said, as he was lying in the hospital, he realized what he wanted most and what he loved the most was to be able to be at the beach. And so what did he do? He's formed an organization. He's forming an organization to try and make it possible for Israelis with the kinds of disabilities that he has, because he now has to go around either on a wheelchair or with a walker of some sort, to be able to have access where they then are able to go to the beach. And he's formed an organization to make this happen. That's a story of resilience. That's a story of not allowing ourselves to be victims. And that's part of who and what we are. Having just been there, I have to say, in many respects, and some of you have been in Israel this summer. How many of you have been in Israel during this past few months or so? So in many respects, and tell me if you disagree or not, it's a tale of two cities. I was amazed to see the traffic and how the traffic jams. I was thrilled to see it. The motorcycle drivers are crazy there. I don't know if people are driving a little more aggressively. It's a sign of perhaps what they're dealing with. I don't know, but the traffic is there. The bate cafe are filled. Restaurants are filled in a way that we don't see in America, whether it's at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, which is dead time here. Shopping malls were filled. All of this was going on. Gil mentioned to me that there's a post-October 7th baby boom, and also a wedding boom post-October 7th. So there's a sense of routine and getting back to normal. And yet, as we all know, anywhere you go, whether it's a traffic circle in Israel, whether it's even just on a bridge, whatever you may see, there's going to be a sign about the hostages. There are going to be pictures of the hostages. There are yellow ribbons, there are yellow chairs, whatever it may be. One of my favorite is the sign that you see when it's giving traffic information. It says something like Kfish Shesh Zorem. It says, Route 6 is flowing, meaning there are no delays. And then underneath of it says, Yachad Ninatzeach. Together, and I like to translate it, not together we will win, but together we will prevail. And so that message is there wherever you are. It's a sense of routine. On the news, either at the beginning or the end of each hour, there is an announcement, and they just happen to matter-of-factly mention how many days since October 7th, how many days our hostages have been kept in captivity. At the end of today, we'll have a brief ceremony, a memorial, remembering and honoring them. It reminds me a bit of the missing letter in a Torah scroll. You know how we're told by the Midrash that if one letter is missing, then the Torah cannot be read because it's not complete. Based on the Midrash, which tells us that when one of the people of Israel is missing, we are not complete. So too is the way it is in Israel today. So we need to transcend our personal feelings about the government. We need to transcend our personal feelings about what's happening. Is Israel perfect? Absolutely not, as I've said before, but that is part of our challenge. Part of our challenge is to bring this message. Part of our challenge is to understand when our family is hurting, when it is alone, our responsibility is to give it comfort, to give it strength, and to support it. When I was in Israel last week, the Democratic freshman delegation of Congress was there, and it was hard for some of them. They told me some of the messages they heard back for their people. And so I told them the story and reminded them the basic midrash, what we all know, and that is that Avraham HaIvri, it's called HaIvri because he had the courage to stand on the other side of the world, on a world that was corrupt, on a world that could not see justice or compassion. He was on the other side. We have to be like Abraham and to have that courage. Or I think about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. Moses, who the greatest characteristic is often attributed to him is his humility. But I would say it's not just his humility, it's his love of his people. When God was going to destroy the people of Israel, he said, if you're going to destroy them, wipe me out. When Moses came down from the from Mount Sinai and he saw the people sinning. What did he do? He took the 10 commandments and he broke Aseret HaDibrot, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, because he knew that if he brought that down, they would be guilty. They would be guilty of violating the second commandment. And he knew if there was a choice between the law and the people, he had to choose the people. And what was God's reaction, according to Midrash? God said to him, Yasher Koach, you chose rightly. You did the right thing because of your love for your people. And so we are on the front line. It is tough out there. I don't need to tell you that. But what is the story that you will tell? What is the message that our people need to hear in light of all that's going on around us? Sometimes I think we're kind of like an abused spouse. We keep going back. We keep going back for more from those who spurn us. And so we must bring a message as you prepare your march this year. What are you going to do to counter all of the negativity about Jews, Judaism, and Israel that's out there? We Jews, yes, we are divided, we are fragmented, but what can you do to promote unity and understanding, to help to heal the divine? That is not a political message. That is a message from our very tradition. And so I just want to say, there's a Yiddish story, and I tried to look it up, the reference. I couldn't get it right before I came. Ruth Wise will be here later today, and anyone who wants it, she can give it to us. The story is about Satan, and Satan says something along the following. He says, I shall not destroy this people from beyond, nor shall I destroy them from outside, nor shall I send enemies to destroy them. Rather, I shall implant doubt within them so that they will come to question the justice and the justness of their own cause. We dare not let that happen. Rabbis, let us be defenders of Israel. Let us be like Moshe Rabbeinu. Let us be lovers of Israel. And let us bring that message to our people, to our congregations this year. Thank you. I want to show a video before I do it. Any comments or questions? We'll take a brief 5-minute break after this, but I don't know how many of you have seen this, but if we can go to the video now, it's called Giborei Me'al.
אז המורה לתנ"ך בגבעתי, המורה ללשון מודיעין, השכן מלמעלה קבלן עבודות, אבל חודש כבר במילואים. עורכת הדין היא קמבצית, עושה משמרות באוגדה. אחיה איש הייטק בכיר, עכשיו הוא צלף על גגות ברצועה. מנהלת הסניף הקשוחה של הבנק היא סמג"ד ביהודה ושומרון. דורון הוא בעל חנות צעצועים, עכשיו הוא מ"פ בשריון. והמדי שלנו כפרה, שלרוב מזמר בקיסריה, הוא לוחם הנדסה מתאושש בגבורה, אחרי שנפצע בלב עזה. נכון כולם נראים רגילים, אבל אנחנו עם של גיבורי על, וכל אחד תמיד מסתתר חייל, מוכן להציל את העולם. יש תנהג אוטובוס של דן, זה שתמיד עומד בזמן, הוא עכשיו מפקד סוללת תותחנים בדרום ליד נרעם. יש סטודנט בטכניון באמצע תואר ראשון, הוא סרן במיל בעוצבת הגליל, כבר חודש בגבול הצפון. יש פה דוגמנית פרמדיקית, יש פה חשמלאי שהוא מגיסט, יש את יוני נגן סקסופון מחונן שהוא קודם כל מטקליסט. יש לכולם ארון נסתר או ארגז גדול מאובזר, יש פה סט של מדים וגלימת מילואים מוכנות תמיד לאתגר. נכון כולם נראים רגילים, אבל אנחנו עם של גיבורי על, בכל אחד תמיד מסתתר חייל, מוכן להציל את העולם. וזה לא משנה אם באמצע חיים או באמצע משחק כדורגל, כולם יעזבו את הכל בשנייה אם יקרא להם הדגל. פה זה לא יקום מקביל, לא מציאות של מרוויל, זה הסיפור שלנו, עם ישראל, זה הסיפור שלנו. נכון כולם נראים רגילים, אבל אנחנו עם של גיבורי על, לכל אחד תמיד מסתתר חייל, מוכן להציל את העולם.